Hello, I'm Marco. So I'll introduce myself. I'm a postdoc at KTH in Sweden. It's a university. And this work was made during my PhD at Urecom in France under the supervision of my co-speaker, Professor Daniele Antonioli. My research topics are in security and privacy. So I analyze proprietary and standard protocols, transports that you all probably know, like Bluetooth Low Energy, Wi-Fi, NFC, and so on, and also mobile security. And now, there you go.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. I take the stage. So thank you for coming to our talk. My name is Daniele Antonioli. I'm an assistant professor at Urecom, a university and research center located in the southern part of France. We do research in security and privacy. We cover topics including Bluetooth, electric scooter, FIDO2 authenticators, and web tracking. You can find more information about my research in the website. Before we start with the talk, I would like to acknowledge 3 co-authors of the E-Trojans research project, Riccardo Cestaro, Eleonora Leusiuk, and Marco Conti. These are researchers from the University of Padua, in Italy, located in Italy. This is the outline of the talk. So I will start by introducing electric scooters, and I will provide a summary of the E-Trojans vulnerabilities and attacks. And then Marco will take over, and he will cover in detail 2 of the E-Trojans attacks. One is called Overvoltage battery destruction attack. The second one is the Undervoltage battery ransomware attack. There are 3 more attacks in our project, and I encourage you to read the research paper about E-Trojans. Then Marco will talk about the reverse engineering techniques we used to uncover these attacks and their vulnerabilities, the toolkit that we developed and partially open sourced, containing ways to test the attacks, and the experiments that we ran against Xiaomi e-scooters. And then Marco will conclude the talk with the presentation of the countermeasures that we recommended to Xiaomi and the responsible disclosure that we did with Xiaomi in the last two years and so. So let's start with a quick introduction. Just to set the stage, we are talking about e-scooters, and e-scooters is what you see on the left. Is an embedded system, a rather complex one. It looks like a smartphone on wheels, and it has a radio interface and can communicate with the smartphone. A smartphone is typically running a companion application to control the e-scooter. And the 2 devices are talking using proprietary protocols, which can be transported using several wireless technologies. Most of the times, this technology is Bluetooth Low Energy because it's low cost and pervasive. But the important thing to remember is that the protocol that is spoken over BLE is a custom one. Typically, it's vendor-specific, might have some security to obscurity measure, and so on and so forth. Then the mobile application communicates with the e-scooter backend, which is a cloud service. And this communication link uses standard internet protocols, such as TLS and TCP/IP. And during the talk, we will focus on this red square, so on the e-scooter, the wireless link between the e-scooter and the mobile app itself. This is our attack surface. For E-Trojans, we decided to focus on Xiaomi e-scooter, specifically because Xiaomi is a market leader. Maybe you know about the M365 and Mi 3. These are 2 very popular electric scooters that are used both for personal, as private scooters, and also in rental services such as Bird. And the companion app for this e-scooter is called Mi Home. This is an app available for Android and iOS, which provides several functionalities. You can create an account with the Xiaomi backend. Then you can pair your app with your e-scooter. And then you can, for example, set a password via the app to lock the scooter, to unlock the scooter. You can get some sensor readings from the e-scooter, like the battery value, the voltage, and so on and so forth. And you can also send firmware updates. Remember this feature because this is the feature that we are exploiting, rogue firmware updates. And it is very important to study e-scooters because these days they can be attacked in several ways, even remotely, in wireless proximity, and an attack on an e-scooter can have not only the typical security and privacy implications, like, for example, I don't know, breaking an encryption protocol or leaking some sensitive data, but if you compromise an e-scooter, you can have some safety concerns, like physical damage. You can maybe set the e-scooter on fire, right? So it is very important that these scooters are properly protected against remote attackers and proximity-based attackers. When we started this research in 2023, we looked at the state of the art, and we found this work from Zimperium from 2019, Don't Give Me a Break, where Zimperium demonstrated an attack where they use a custom application running on the attacker's smartphone. This custom application was capable of crafting a wireless packet, BLE packet, using this Xiaomi proprietary protocol that they reverse engineer. And by using this application, the researchers were able to demonstrate a remote lock command on the e-scooter shown here in the picture. And by starting from this related work, then we ran an extensive security evaluation on Xiaomi scooter, and then we presented a paper called eSpoofer in 2023 at ACM WISEC. This is a premier conference on wireless security and privacy, where we studied all the ways to compromise an e-scooter while spoofing a trusted Xiaomi Mi Home app. We demonstrated proximity-based attack, where using a device, we were capable of pairing maliciously with the scooter and then not only sending a lock command, but any authorized command that you can do if you have a legitimate Mi Home app. And also we extended the attacker model to what we call a remote attacker, which is different from what we've seen in the previous picture in Zimperium, because this time we install a malicious application on the victim's phone. This malicious application is coexisting with Mi Home. And then whenever it detects that there is an e-scooter in range, then it can send malicious payloads. And this is a sort of a remote attack surface because we can remotely target the scooter via the app, and we can easily spread this malicious app as, for example, a modding app. Whenever you have an e-scooter, you can install from third-party markets these modding applications where you can change the maximum velocity of the scooter. So it's quite easy for an attacker to repackage one of these modding apps that are very popular and they're not checked by the user and then compromise the e-scooter. So this is eSpoofer, and then the follow-up paper is E-Trojans. This is the focus of this talk. And this is a research where we started from the eSpoofer findings, and then we evaluated what we could do as a remote/proximity attacker by sending these malicious commands, proprietary commands over BLE, to affect the e-scooter internals. So the focus is the internals of the e-scooter. The paper there is a preprint on arXiv, and the paper is currently under submission also for an academic conference. So let's quickly look at the scooter internals. You have several system on chips which are coexisting in the e-scooter. One is the DRV, the electric motor system, here color-coded in yellow. This is a chip that is managing the electric motor. This chip is connected to a BTS and the BMS subsystems. The BTS is the Bluetooth subsystem. This is the radio system. This is very important. It's the gateway that provides access to the other subsystems via wireless signals. And so, for example, whenever you are sending a firmware update, you want to update, I don't know, the firmware of the DRV, then the firmware is sent over BLE from the Mi Home app to the BTS, and then the BTS is distributing the firmware internally using an embedded bus like UART. And then the third important subsystem is the battery management system. This is the system that is managing the battery, is managing the charging of the e-scooter. And if you look under the hood, typically it includes two modules. One is the battery controller, and the other one is the battery monitor, which are indicated here as BCTRL and BMON. One important thing to understand is that the battery controller firmware can be updated over the air, together with the DRV firmware and the BTS firmware. Instead, the battery monitor is like an analog front end, which can be partially programmed via the battery controller. There is a bus connecting them, an embedded bus, an I2C bus. And then you can send signals to write register and read registers to program the battery monitor. And we will see later that you can use this as an attack vector to compromise the battery management system. Then there is a battery charger that you can plug on the e-scooter, and then you can charge the e-scooter. This is just a picture of the internals. So if you open an electric scooter, this is what you will see: a DRV, a BMS, the battery cells, the ST-Link, the back cables, and also the BTS system on chip. The BTS system on chip typically is located close to the headlight, while the other chips are located at the base of the scooter, where you also have the battery. This is a picture of the battery management system, two-sided picture. On one side, you have the battery controller. On the other side, you have the battery monitor. So these are two systems on chip on the same subsystem. And in our E-Trojans evaluation, we focus on two very popular e-scooters. Remember that we started this analysis in 2023. And at that time, the most famous, most popular scooter was the Mi 3. So that's why we targeted it. This is a second-generation e-scooter from 2021. And then also we decided to target the most popular first-generation Xiaomi scooter, which is called M365. And by targeting these two scooters, we also implicitly target what is in between, like the Pro 2, the 1S, and the Essential. These are scooters from 2018 and 2020, so these are also in scope. And this is just a list of chips that we target. So these e-scooters are sharing these chips, and the chips might be running different firmware versions, but the problems still holds. The BTS is running a Nordic NRF51. This is a very popular chip for radio communications. The DRV is running an STM32 chip, the Bluetooth controller, and STM micro with an STM8 architecture. And the BMON, the analog front end, is a Texas Instrument chip, which is partially programmable. All right, so now let's look at the E-Trojans vulnerabilities and attacks. So we start with the following threat model. We have a victim that owns an e-scooter. It is paired with the e-scooter via the malicious app. We have an attacker that can either target the e-scooter in proximity using BLE signals, so with the laptop, with the special BLE board, or the attacker can also install a malicious application on the victim's smartphone and then target the e-scooter from the smartphone of the victim. So this is the threat model. And we run an extensive reverse engineering campaign on these e-scooters using static and dynamic techniques. Marco will talk briefly about these techniques later. But long story short, we uncovered 4 critical vulnerabilities affecting this e-scooter. First one is that the fact that the Bluetooth controller firmware is unencrypted. And so we were able to extract the firmware both from the Neom app and also from the memory of the Bluetooth controller, and then reverse engineer the firmware. The second problem is that the Bluetooth control firmware is not signed. This is really bad. This means that you can install a rogue firmware on the electric scooter using a wireless signal. And this is exactly what we do. So our attack technique is a rogue firmware update. And the firmware that is like a payload. And then with this attack technique, we can mount different attacks. One attack, one payload. The third vulnerability is that the UART communications, which are implemented to connect the internals, system on chips, lack integrity, encryption, and authentication. And this is also very bad, because we can combine a rogue malicious firmware update with the fact that in the firmware, we can program the Bluetooth controller to behave as the DRV or the BTS, because we can spoof the internals. And then we can send several internal messages to get data from the BTS, to prevent the BTS from knowing that something is wrong, to stop charging, to do whatever we want. And so the combination of V2 and V3 is very powerful. And then there is also a problem of denial of service, because the UART communications in the internals are not protected against denial of service. And then we were able to exploit this vulnerability to denial of service the internals of the scooter via rogue firmware update. So these are the 4 vulnerabilities that will be exploited in the attacks. And this is the E-Trojans attack technique, taking advantage of these vulnerabilities. So there is the attacker. The attacker is communicating with the radio system. The radio system is the gateway into the internals of the scooter. The first message of the attacker is exploiting e-spoofer. If you remember, with e-spoofer, we were capable of bypassing authentication, by using some tricks and some vulnerabilities that we found. And once we bypass authentication, then we can act as if we are the real Me Home app. So we are the real Me Home app, and then we send a Bluetooth controller firmware update message over Bluetooth Low Energy. Remember that all these messages are not standard BLE messages, but these are proprietary messages. So you have to reverse engineer the protocol before being able to send these messages. And once we send this firmware update message, the radio system is getting the firmware, which is inside the set of messages that we send, and then it is distributing the firmware to the Bluetooth controller module. The Bluetooth controller module is installing our malicious firmware, and then is answering with a message that everything is fine, and then the radio is answering to the attacker saying that everything is fine. So this is the E-Trojans attack technique, a rogue firmware update, exploiting the lack of integrity protection in the Bluetooth controller. The Bluetooth controller is not checking that there is no signature to check. And also we are exploiting the fact that we can spoof internals because the internal communications are not protected as well. And then we use this attack technique to present 5 new attacks. First one is the undervoltage battery ransomware. Marco will talk in detail about it. This is the first, as far as we know, ransomware for electric scooter. This is the first attack that is using undervoltage as an attack technique. We present an overvoltage battery destruction attack. And this is the first attack that is using overvoltage to target an e-scooter. And these two will be presented in detail. Next, I will focus on the last 3, which are, if you want to get more details about the last 3 attacks, you can read the paper. But basically, with the third attack, we can track the user via internals. So we show that it's possible to create a fingerprint of the e-scooter by reading some values that are unique for each scooter, like a battery serial number, the electric motor serial number. And these are very strong fingerprints. Then we create the fingerprint, and then we use the BLE module to advertise this fingerprint. And then with the network of sniffers, we can track a user based on this fingerprint. This is the first time that an attack has been demonstrated on an e-scooter, such a tracking attack. Then we also do a denial of service attack, where we break the UART communication inside internals with our malicious firmware. And also, interestingly, we are also capable of leaking the password, the Me Home password via the e-scooter. This is also interesting. Whenever you have an e-scooter, you can set the password to lock and unlock it. But the password is not only stored on the app, but it is also stored on the e-scooter hashed. And so we are capable of recovering this hash and then leaking the hash the same way we leak the fingerprint. And then we can brute force the hash and recover the password of a user or the PIN code of the user. All right, now Marco will take over and continue with the technical details of the 2 attacks.
Thank you, Daniele, for letting me explain the cool part, the attacks. So we'll talk about 2 attacks, starting from the overvoltage battery destruction. So first, what is an overvoltage? This is a picture of a battery cell. You have multiple of them inside your battery. So now we are talking about a Xiaomi lithium battery cell, and it has an operating range of 4.2 volt, which is the 100% charge, and then up, down to 3.6 volt, which is when the scooter stops driving and you are at 0% charge. This is a normal operating range. Battery overvoltage happens when you have a voltage overflow, so when the voltage of a battery cell goes over 4.2 volt. So the charge goes above 100%. So this can happen if you have a compromise, a malfunctioning charger. So this is what we are assuming in our threat model. And overvoltage is a very dangerous physical state that has serious consequences. For example, leads to permanent battery damage, cells become imbalanced, so they have different voltages. You have overheating due to the increased energy going through. And this also leads to safety hazards like fires or explosion. So the battery monitor has an overvoltage threshold register. If the voltage of a cell goes over this threshold, the battery monitor sets an OV, an overvoltage fault bit to 1 in the system stat register, and also sends an alert to the battery controller. The battery controller can write battery monitor register. So he has read and write access to most of the battery monitor registers. This means that we can influence the battery monitor from the battery controller, which we can access since we can do the malicious firmware update. So for example, we do several things, but just 2 things as an example. We write FF in the threshold register for overvoltage to set this threshold from 4.2 to 4.7. This is the maximum amount that the battery monitor supports. So this is why we call it a critical overvoltage. We are going over the maximum limit that is settable by the battery controller. Or, for example, we can unset the overvoltage fault bit to 0 in the systat register, so that it doesn't look like there is an overvoltage going on from the point of view of the battery monitor. So for the attack, overvoltage battery destruction starts with the malicious firmware flashing, and then this battery controller does the following. We set the overvoltage threshold to the maximum, 4.7. This allows us to perform the dangerous overvoltage. Then we ignore every overvoltage alert from the battery monitor. This means that whatever security measure that Xiaomi put in the battery controller, we're just not executing it and ignoring it, because we have control of the battery controller. So, of course. Then we unset the overvoltage fault bit in the battery monitor. And also, we set this FET charge bit to 1. So when there is an overvoltage, there is this FET charge that can block charging. So under normal circumstances, the scooter does not charge anymore, even though if it's plugged into the electricity. But if the battery controller sets this to 1, it starts charging again. So now, since we are ignoring the fault bit and making it charging, we can go over the critical overvoltage threshold. Then we also don't want load balancing, because load balancing means that we are equalizing the voltage of cells. So if a cell is overvolted, we are putting the voltage into other lower voltage cells and making them equal. And hopefully, this technique tries to put them all in the operating range. So we don't want this. We want them imbalanced. We want overvoltage. So we change the balancing bits in the cell ball registers. And finally, we just report that there is no overvoltage going on to the Bluetooth system and ultimately to the user. So the attack is stealthy. So now we look at a more sophisticated attack, which is the undervoltage battery ransomware, UBR. So what is undervoltage? So now we have the same battery cell and the same operating range. In this case, battery undervoltage happens when the voltage underflows. So when a voltage of a battery cell goes below 3.6 volt, which is a nominal lower value. So the charge goes below 0%. Yes, it's possible. So undervoltage is also a safety risk, because in its consequences, you have also permanent battery damage. You have the batteries that cannot recharge anymore due to the damage. You can even have polarity inversion. So when you have a deep discharged battery cell, so the voltage is very low, close to 0, and there is current going through, you can have this phenomenon which reverses the polarity of the battery. And this is very dangerous and leads to fires, short circuits, and explosion. So similarly to before, there is an undervoltage threshold in the battery monitor. If we go lower, we set the undervoltage fault bit, and we also raise the undervoltage alarm to the battery controller. The battery controller can also write the undervoltage registers. So if we write 00, in this case, we set the undervoltage threshold to the lowest amount possible. which is 1.58, which we call critical undervoltage. It's even below the maximum settable value. Then we can also unset the undervoltage fault bit, like before. So when we deploy the undervoltage battery ransomware, we do the following. We flash our firmware in the battery controller, and then we set the threshold for undervoltage to the minimum, 1.58, so we can do the dangerous undervoltage. We ignore the undervoltage alerts, and also we don't do anything that the battery controller will normally do to prevent undervoltage. We also unset the undervoltage fault bit, and now we set the FET discharge bit. So the FET discharge is a different kind of set. It's a different bit in the same register, and this allows the scooter to minimize the energy, the power consumption. Because when we are undervolting, it means that we are draining power. So if we shut down the Bluetooth system and the motor system, we are reducing consumption, and undervoltage can be mitigated. So we don't want that, so we set the FET discharge bit to 1, so we can continue discharging the battery and go below the critical undervoltage status. We also don't want balancing for the same reasons as overvoltage. We don't want balanced cell. We want high difference in voltage. And it is also stealthy, so we don't report any undervoltage to the Bluetooth system and to the user. So UBR is the first e-scooter ransomware. We target physically the battery. We do undervoltage to physically damage the battery. This is different than typical ransomware, which targets the data, encrypts the data. We put a trigger condition in the ransomware, which at some point, for example, when we reach critical undervoltage, it reveals the infection to the victim. So we do this by changing the BLE advertisement. So we send a Xiaomi command to the Bluetooth system to change the BLE advertisement of the device with a short link to download our app. The app explains to the users his unlucky situation and ask him for a ransom. Otherwise, the scooter will continue draining power, and the battery will be permanently damaged, and this increases over time. So it's a ticking clock to recover, to stop the undervoltage. We also provide a recovery service. We are very kind in our ransomware. So you can flash this battery controller firmware for recovery. So this recovery doesn't mean that you reverse the physical damage. The damage is physical. You can't do anything about it. Your battery health is already diminished. But you can solve the undervoltage issue by raising the voltage. Because in the normal Xiaomi firmware, if the scooter is undervolted, you can charge it. That's it. We remove this because of safety reasons. But we remove this, and we get you this recovery firmware. So you can at least use the scooter in whatever condition remains. So this attack, UBR, is also usable without asking for a ransom. And this is a silent destruction of your battery. You just undervolt it, and then eventually the battery will die. So now I will talk about the reverse engineering, the toolkit that we released today on GitHub, and the evaluation. So we took months of reverse engineering in order to understand the e-scooter internal architecture and the firmware. We've used a set of dynamic and static techniques. So for example, we decompile the firmware, we read the bus traffic. 2 examples. We use Ghidra to perform static reversing of the battery controller firmware. So we downloaded the plugin because it is a STM8, which is not super popular. And we also had to set the memory addresses by looking at the schematics to understand the starting address, the end address of the RAM, of the flash, and so on. Otherwise, the code will be unreadable. And we also done dynamic analysis. So for example, firmware runtime debugging. And we could do this by plugging an ST-Link debugger into the swim of the battery controller. So we soldered the wires into the correct pins, and we could read the traffic and the memory of the firmware using this cosmic debugger, which is the standard toolchain for this chip, in a GDB-like terminal. We released the open source E-Trojans toolkit. It has 3 modules: the binary firmware patcher, where you can patch the firmware in order to add malicious capabilities. So we use these malicious capabilities as building blocks for our attacks. So you can even build your own attack by combining the capabilities we offer. We offer disabling of overvoltage and undervoltage protections, of charging, of firmware updates, of load balancing. We do voltage spoofing to the Bluetooth system, and the changing the BLE advertisement, and a few more capabilities. Then we also release the malicious battery controller firmware, so for the attacks, and they are flashable with a script. Here we have redacted some parts of the code regarding the overvoltage and the undervoltage attacks, because we don't want to release malware in the wild. So for the other attacks, you have everything, but for these ones, you don't really have the full binary firmware patcher or the full firmware. And finally, we also released the ransom app for the payment and its backend. Then we evaluated the attacks on 2 scooters in 2024. And here are some interesting results, experimental results done with real-world scooters in our lab. So for the overvoltage, we reached up to 4.9 volt. So the limit will be 4.2. We got to 4.9 on both scooters. The battery was overheating already within 5 minutes. And we reached 80 degrees. At this point, it's starting to get unsafe. So we stopped the experiment. And there's that. Then the undervoltage battery ransomware. We undervolted the M365 basically to 0 volt. Because when you reach 0, there is so little voltage, so little power, that the scooter cannot even maintain just the battery monitor and the battery controller. So they reboot, and then you have to start from a different level. And for the ES3, we could reach 1.58 volt, which is the lowest amount you can set in the battery monitor. And this is because we found an additional voltage check, not within the BMS, but within the DRV firmware. So the motor firmware can check the voltage. And if you go under this limit, it will raise an error and reboot the scooter. So we can keep it at this level. And it is still dangerous under voltage, but we couldn't go below, because it was out of scope to attack this other firmware. And UBR reduced the autonomy in half, of the autonomy of the M365 in half, within 3.5 hours. Basically, this is the time it takes to go from 5% charge to critical undervoltage, because the damage is very fast to accumulate. And if you keep it for more time, you have more damage to the battery. We also looked at the other scooters. Even if we didn't have them in the lab, we looked at their architecture, their components, and we think that they are vulnerable as well, because they are the same vulnerabilities, the same component, the same internals. So everything should apply to them. It's just that we didn't have the real-world devices. Last slide deck, the countermeasures and the responsible disclosure process. So we propose 4 countermeasures for the 4 vulnerabilities we identified. Those are lightweight countermeasures. We propose, for example, SCP-03, which is a constrained protocol for secure bus communication. And they are also legacy compliant. We only use crypto and the defense mechanisms that Xiaomi already uses for the other firmwares. So they should be easy to implement for them. Then we disclosed E-Spoofer and E-Trojans attacks on the HackerOne bug bounty platform that Xiaomi uses for their vulnerability disclosure. So E-Spoofer, it was reported in November 2021, and the response was that vulnerabilities were not reproduced. They were not able to reproduce them. Then for E-Trojans, first round of disclosure, 2023, the attacks were not able to be reproduced. But then after the second round, a few months ago, they acknowledged our findings. They contacted us. They assigned us a medium CVE for the vulnerabilities, and they gave us the highest bounty in our tier. And we also talked with them some more, and they have a statement for this talk. So the M365 and the ES3 models are at the end of their life cycle. So that's why they don't have firmware updates in the last years. And these vulnerabilities that we shown you have been mitigated in all subsequent Xiaomi electric scooters, and they incorporate now enhanced security measures. So just to summarize the talk, we've shown you that we can attack over BLE the e-scooter internals. We can flash a malicious firmware that overvolts, undervolts the battery, causes safety issues, has safety, security, and privacy implications. So among the battery safety hazards are fires, explosions. This is just always the risk. So we also track the user via their internal identifiers. We leak the hashed password of the user. We leak private information like the mileage of the scooter. We've also proven one time again that security obscurity is bad and was not enough to stop us from discovering these attacks and vulnerabilities. And also, we believe that we can deploy E-Trojans on other battery-powered devices as long as they share a similar architecture and vulnerability. It should be applicable, but we didn't test it. This is a work for later. So thank you for the attention, and you can now step up to the microphone, ask us questions, and after the time is finished, we will still be staying in this room, not in the wrap-up room, in this room, to answer to other questions live. So thank you.